Welcome to the Enduro Method podcast. Enduro Method is an online strength and conditioning program built for those who ride by those who ride. We are professional coaches dedicated to building the best and most revolutionary off-the-bike training for dirt bikers around. We are offering a special discount for our podcast listeners. Use discount code EMPodcast22 for 50% off your first month. For more information, head to the description of this podcast where you can find the discount code and a link for more information and to sign up.
All right, welcome to the Enduro Method podcast. Today we're going to talk about 6 ways to progress or regress exercises. It's definitely not to say there's only 6, but this is kind of the 6 that we came up with, and we're going to talk our way through this. I'm joined today by Dane. How you doing?
Hi.
First, how and when would you know to either progress or regress exercises?
Yeah.
So we're kind of going to talk about this from an aspect of like having a program to already follow, because that would be, we just need a baseline, somewhere to kind of start. So a good way to think about when to progress exercise, either the difficulty or loading or whatever, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, is when the number of sets and reps that are called out for in that program have become easier, right? You can complete them with great form. I mean, they're probably still challenging for you, but you're able to do it with good form and technique and complete all of them. Then that's the time to start thinking about using maybe one of these 6 techniques to then make it more challenging for yourself. And on the flip side of that, if there's a set number of sets and reps called out for and you are unable to perform them either with good technique or maybe the exercise or loading or parameters or whatever are just too difficult, then you need to think about regressing that down or scaling it down to something that you were able to do, and then over time you're able to build back up to it. So having a baseline and something that you're using as a standard, I guess, would be a way to then judge whether you need to progress or regress. And of course, pain and injury, stuff like that is always a way to look at that as well. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, one thing would be to test and retest, like make sure you're tracking what you do, that way if you care.
Right, keeping a log of weights.
Keeping a log, yeah, like this week I did, 95 by 5 back squats. So, and that felt good. Wasn't sore. My form was perfect. Next week, maybe I could try 105, or 115 or whatever. So that gives you, like, keeping a log of everything, whether that's, in your whatever application you're using, pen and paper. Like, we have people that come to our gym with, like, a notebook and they write everything down.
Right. So you're establishing a little bit of a baseline or consistency of weights and use for reps and stuff like that.
Yeah. So I would say that's, the tried and true way is to write it down or log it somewhere. That way
right.
Whether you should or should not progress or regress.
Right. Yeah, and for the most part, I mean, that's what we're constantly kind of looking to do, right? We're trying to progress over time. It's not a linear line. That's why that's probably a topic for another time, but that's why you can't just add weight for the rest of your life, right? If you start lifting today, you're not going to have a linear progression of just adding weight over time.
No.
Right? It'll work for a little while.
And I would be so freaking strong right now.
And then you'll plateau, and then you'll probably regress some, and then, anyways. So there are a bunch of different strategies to help do that. If you do follow a program like Enduro Method, a lot of this stuff's already built into what we do. But even if you were following that, there might be some exercises or reps that are called out for that are not attainable for you. So having some of these things in your bag or ideas as a toolkit is a great way to make sure to keep moving forward. So number 1 of our 6 is range of motion. So range of motion is a great way to either progress or regress any exercise, really. And that just means you're changing how far you're moving through whatever the rep calls out for. So let's use a squat as an example, just because it's pretty easy to think about. If you're doing a squat and staying really high, right? So you're just doing a quarter squat. That would be a lot easier. And as you get stronger and in better position, you would just increase the depth of that squat till we were going as far down as we were able to maintain a good position, hopefully getting hip crease below the knee at some point.
Yeah. Or if to regress it, if you don't have the strength to pull yourself out of the squat all the way down, then regress it by not going as far.
Not going as deep. Correct. And there's many ways you can attain that. You could set a box underneath you and squat to a box to use as a depth gauge, and then as consistently you were able to get to that depth, for whatever reps or sets and reps you were doing, you could decrease the height of that box, and that would give you a really solid measurement aspect of that range of motion. Pull-ups too would be...
Well, that one, it's funny because I was just trying to think of other movements because I'm like, I wouldn't sometimes maybe if it was like to regress a pull-up, I would put it in one of these other categories that we haven't touched on yet. But like range of motion, like another one I could think of that would work would be a lunge. Like if you can't get your knee all the way down to the ground, maybe you just shorten that up a little bit. But otherwise, or then increasing range of motion, you could do an elevated lunge to progress it. But like, what other movements are there?
Well, pull-up, you could start with the scap pull-up.
True.
Right. And then usually the top part of the pull-up's the hardest part, but you could do reps in the bottom half.
Yeah. But like a push-up, I wouldn't, over telling someone to go shorten the push-up, I would tell them to, like what we haven't touched on, but like do a different method, like change the angle of which they're doing their push-ups at. Versus doing a short range of motion push-up.
Yeah, but think of how many people have started off doing quarter push-ups, even though we've been highly encouraging of full range of motion, and then over time, after a couple months, they're actually able to do a full range of motion push-up. So, yeah, range of motion is one of those things that there's always usually a standard, and the more range of motion we can go through safely, the better. But by shortening the range of motion in the beginning, and one of the things we'll get into later is tempo, which will really come into play with this, but using that as a tool to potentially get to a point where we're going through a full range of motion is a good way to progress or regress exercises. Loaded and unloaded. So it's great for body weight and if you have access to a gym. All right, second one, how to progress or regress would just be by exercise selection.
So this would be like... What was our examples that we thought about?
Well, and again, there's going to be overlap in a lot of these, but you could squat. We'll just stick with that because it seems to be easy. But if your goal was to get to a one-legged squat, but you didn't have the strength, just through exercise selection, maybe you're starting with a regular 2-foot air squat. And once you've built up more strength than that, then you're going to some lunge variations, right? Bulgarian split squat, or something like that. So it's a little bit more challenging because now we're going from a 2-footed exercise to a one-legged exercise. And then from a Bulgarian split squat, we're going to a skater squat, maybe assisted, and then finally to a pistol squat. So you can move through a thoughtful progression of exercises that get more challenging as you go.
My thought was the pull-up example. So like regressing a pull-up, if you can't do a pull-up, exercise selection, changing that to a ring row, because a ring row is still a pulling mechanic,
correct,
but less intense for most people.
Yes, and it's much easier to scale because your feet are on the ground and
right.
You can walk yourself to a position and an angle that's easier, that basically demands less body weight to pull.
Scaling a a push up to a dumbbell bench press. You're still getting the mechanics, but instead of lifting your body weight, you're lifting maybe 10 pounds in each hand.
Right. And typically when you're doing from an exercise selection standpoint,
you're staying within the category of what the exercise is targeting.
Yes, you want to, exactly.
The muscle group.
Keep the muscle group and the ideals the same. So if you're doing a leg push, you're going to go from a 2-legged to a 1-legged, right? It's going to increase in difficulty. Same with pulling. You might end up start at a 2-arm variation and end with a single arm variation. Anything else on that one? That one seems fairly self-explanatory. Maybe it's not.
I was just trying to think of other examples of what
The only time I'd say it gets more tricky is when we start talking about load, and that's our next one, because it's so easy to just make every exercise super challenging because all you got to do is put more weight on it, right? But a thoughtful progression through exercises is very helpful. I guess it probably gets more and more important when the exercise you're trying to achieve is more challenging. Like if you want to bar muscle up,
right?
Like you probably have to
go start with all these different exercises.
Exactly. You really do need to have a thoughtful progression through things.
And that would work with the pistol too, or a single leg squat. Like if you want to do a full single leg squat, that's why you'd start with maybe an air squat, then move to a single leg squat to box, to skater squat, blah blah blah. So I mean that totally makes sense. Like the more complex the exercise, a good modification would be exercise selection.
Totally. Like if you want a 1-arm pull-up, you better have a pretty darn good
two-handed
6-month plan to like get you to that 1-arm pull-up, right? Yeah. All right. So number 3, load or resistance. This is probably the most common. It's by far the easiest way to progress and also regress exercises is just manipulating the load or resistance.
Yep.
You could talk about this through everything. You could talk about this for conditioning work. I'll try not to get sidetracked. We're talking about exercises. And again, if we just go to the squat example, you're just adding weight. Like if you're doing a back squat.
You'll progress it by adding weight, regress it by taking weight off and maybe going body weight.
Right. And this would tie in a little bit with exercise selection because you can vary the back squat for most people is probably a little bit easier than, let's say, a front squat, which is potentially a little bit easier than a Zercher
exercise
squat.
Selection.
Totally. Right, we can do...
there you go. You could regress a front squat by doing a Zercher squat if it hurts your wrists.
Absolutely. So all kinds of options there, but loading is probably one of the easiest ones. Manipulating where the load is on the body, how you hold it, all that stuff can completely change the stimulus from the thing. So it's really cool because there's such an infinite number of ways to approach all these things. You could do lunge variations and just have a barbell, dumbbells, and kettlebells and spend a year going through lunge variations. Where you hold them, how you hold them, 1-arm, 2-arm, overhead, by your side, front rack, like pretty endless options, and it's keeps it training interesting. And the other thing that this adds is we were talking about that linear progression of you can't just add weight forever. Mm-hmm. But by manipulating exercise selection and load, you're able to keep making gains over time in all these different areas, and you're just kind of by keeping these variations.
I feel like they're like exercise selections and range of motion. There's like it's kind of a little bit more gray. Like how did I progress that? Whereas load, you can easily say, I squatted 65 pounds or I squatted 85 pounds.
Correct. But
so like
where that becomes important is keeping the range of motion the same as you're adding weight.
Yeah.
Right.
But like I'm just saying it's like more black and white. Like it's how to progress an exercise, add weight.
Totally.
How to regress, take it off. Yep. Resistance is the same. It's a little bit more. It's not a 10-pound weight. It's a pink band or whatever. That, to be honest, even the ratings on those, like pink band is say it's 30 pounds. Like it's
what
so
part of the
variable.
Stretch, right?
Yeah, what part of the stretch. So, it's just like that would go back to recording it, writing it down so you know.
Right. Instead of actually taking the word of whatever's printed on the band, just say the color and not how thick it was or whatever.
Yeah.
Tempo. So number 4. This one is super cool. You can... This is one of the best tools out. One of the great tools out there for getting variance in training and making things either harder or easier, but especially if loading is a little bit more challenging, a great way to, if you, let's say you don't have as many options of weights, incorporating tempo work is a great way to get a really good stimulus without having as much access to as many weights as you want. So what we mean by tempo, and we're talking about this in a one rep, which let's say one, again, we'll just use a back squat as an example. It's a cadence for every rep, right? So it's a time count for how you complete the rep. It's 4 numbers, typically, potentially 1 letter, but the first one refers to the lowering of the movement, or the negative, the eccentric portion. And
so you're just talking about how tempos are written on the internet.
How they're written, well, not just the internet, but yes. And what they are, right? It's a rep count, and there's kind of 4 parts to each movement. So there's the eccentric, the lengthening of the muscle. There's the bottom portion of the movement. There's the concentric, which is the shortening of the muscle. And then the top of the movement. So that's the 4 parts of returning to where you start. When it's written, it's always written the same way. And so you have to be careful on what the movements are to make sure.
At least with Enduro Method, it's written the same way.
All tempos should be always written the same way. And then the movement potentially changes. Like, as an example, a back squat, you start with the bar on your shoulders standing up, right? That's the start of the movement. With the tempo, that first number that you see is going to be always the eccentric portion of the lift. So a back squat, it's easy. You start going down. That's the eccentric portion. You'd go down for whatever the call out would be. Let's call it 3 seconds for now. So you go 1, 2, 3. Then you'd be at your bottom portion of the lift. There would be a second call out for that. Maybe it's 1. So you stay at the bottom for 1 second. Then a typical one is X, which would just be up as fast as possible. But let's say there's a second count there for 3 seconds as well. So then you would stand up over the course of 3 seconds. 1, 2, 3. 1 second at the top of the movement. And that's your rep. So that rep, before you ever even do it, it should take you exactly 8 seconds. 3 seconds down, 1 second hold, 3 seconds up, 1 second at the top. Again, because of that tempo and the time under tension while you're doing it, it makes lightweight much harder, right? Even bodyweight movement. So it's a great way to manipulate and potentially throw it in if you don't have as big a weight selection as you want. Even if you do, it's still really good for a number of reasons to increase tendon health and other things like that. But anything to add? Tempo?
Yeah, like to regress, how would you regress using tempo?
Usually like just lighter weight, and then playing around with the tempo of the movement, right? The seconds that it takes to complete each rep. Because you can also, the cool part with tempo is you can also kind of pinpoint weak points. So back to like the pull-up example, because typically the top half of the pull-up is the hardest part, right? So you can, maybe you do a pull-up and you have to hold your chin over the bar at the top for 3 seconds and then slowly lower yourself down for 3 seconds, right? So you're able to kind of take maybe a target area where you have weakness and put a little bit more emphasis on it instead of just getting your chin over the bar and going back down and not spending any time building strength there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I feel like most movements you do slower, the harder it is.
Yeah. But you can also take a movement maybe, and instead of going super heavy, stay light, regress it by light load, but then increase your tempo on the per rep.
Mm-hmm.
All right, number 5. This would go up to me right up there with load.
Yeah, I was going to say this one's pretty black and white with load.
Yep. Reps. So to make something more challenging, do more of it. Right? So you could say I could do 5 back squats at 185 pounds. on week 1, well, next week I'm going to try and do 6 back squats at 185 pounds. And then next week, 7 back squats at 185 pounds. And again, you can see where you can't do this forever, right? At some point, 100 back squats at 185, it's going to be pretty hard. So this works for a little while, and then you need to incorporate some other tools to then continue progressing over time.
Yeah, and all of these options, like, they're kind of like intermixed. Like, I just thought of, like, you know, what you just said, back squat, 185 by 5, 185 by 6, 185 by 7, 185 by 8. Then you go back increase the weight, the load, 195 by 5, you know, and then see, you know, you can keep progressing stuff like that. So where you're just, not all of these are one and only, like you're...
Yeah, they don't live in a vacuum.
Yeah, so you can, like, mix them all, or, like, another example, 5 by 5, 185, and then you add a tempo. So instead of playing with the reps, now you're playing with the tempo. But yeah, reps is a good one. I really like reps for pull-ups.
Yeah.
Because everyone cares how many pull-ups they can do.
And if you don't, you should.
And if you don't, you should. But yeah, you know, 20 reps is typically harder than 15 reps. But that one's pretty straightforward. Increase volume.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that one's pretty straightforward. I think what you said kind of hit it on the head, though. They're mostly all a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
You know, like, to me, range of motion, once the standard range of motion is achieved,
then you manipulate the rest to progress.
Then you manipulate load and resistance, exercise selection, tempo, reps. You know, but, like, we do want to get range of motion to be consistent for the movement that you're doing. And then outside of, like, maybe progressing and regressing exercises, trying to increase range of motion in certain areas from a mobility standpoint can be really good. But even if, like, I'm trying to think of an example. Let's say I can back squat, like, ass to grass, like Olympic lifting style, right? I want to mostly go that deep when I squat, but I'm probably not going to go, like, rock bottom all the time. Like if I were catching a snatch overhead. I don't know if that example works.
You might have just lost. You lost me, maybe everyone else.
Yeah. Anyways, once our standards of range of motions are achieved, and you're able to hit that consistently, then manipulating the other factors.
Yeah. To go along with reps, one thing, I mean, you can attest to this. We had a client that we were working with that they wanted to decrease the volume of pull-ups they could do. Like, going back to my pull-up thing, everyone cares about how many pull-ups you can do. So, like, you just added one every week. Like, you kind of went on that linear progression. And they started at, I think, and they were already pretty decent at doing pull-ups. I don't remember, but maybe 9, and then they got to like 14 pull-ups or something. I mean, granted, their training age is, 7+ years of being in our gym, but being able to jump from 9 pull-ups to 14 pull-ups as a female is pretty legit.
Yeah, that was great.
So, like, that was a cool way. So if you're like, what can I incorporate? There's a tangible one, like, do as many pull-ups as you can one time a week and see if that number goes up every week.
Right. Yeah, there's so many ways to go about doing all these things. It's kind of like picking one and being consistent enough to see some results from it.
Yeah.
Not to get terribly too sidetracked, but you can also, like, on a bigger picture, and this was like I know West Side Barbell.
This is where you're going at with the snatch example?
No, Louis Simmons would always do this, but he would add up total pounds lifted, right? And the first time I saw it, I was like, holy shit, this is way too much math and way too complicated. But what it boiled down to is, like, we're going to lift 24,000 pounds today on a back squat. And then next week we need to do 24,500. And then next week we need to do 25,000, right? So every week it was just this macro picture of we need to lift this much weight, and as long as we're lifting this much weight, even in the reps and the sets, like, they're less important than us hitting this volume number. Mm-hmm. And obviously a lot more into it and all that stuff, but it's just a way to look at it and be like, okay, cool, that makes sense. Like, if I'm gonna go run and I want to start increasing, and I need to hit 10 miles a week, and I want to increase that. I don't care how I get my 10 miles a week in, but next week I want to, and then the week after that I'm going to do 11, and then 12, and then 13. So however you want to break that up, you can do 6 and 4, you could do 2, 2, 2, 2, 2. Like, it doesn't really matter as long as you're hitting that goal, right? It's just another way to think about it. And that could be a pull-up example, that could be whatever you want. So,
okay, last one.
Very many options. Last one, balance and stability. So as far as progressing and regressing exercises,
you can take balance and stability out or add it in there to progress or regress a movement.
Yes.
So a single leg deadlift, so a single leg RDL, if you're unable to complete the movement due to balance or stability, you can hold on to something to take that out.
You could add stability.
Add stability, yeah.
Right, by like holding onto a rig or a wall or a PVC pipe or something.
Or if you're doing a deadlift with both legs, you can increase the difficulty by doing it on one leg.
Yes, and there you'd be adding instability. The thing that needs to be thought about on this one is the more unstable the surface, the less force you can apply. So it's not that some of this stuff doesn't make sense, but if your goal, it's goal oriented. So if you're really strong and that's taken care of, and you want to play around with maybe trying to increase some balance or increase some stability, maybe it's worthwhile doing some single leg RDLs on a Bosu ball or on a really thick foam pad, right, to introduce some of that stuff. And there's probably some benefit to be gained from that. But if you're on the side where you're trying to get stronger, first and foremost, you shouldn't be adding instability into their exercises and trying to get stronger. You should be doing them from the most stable, relatively, positions possible and working on some of these other things that we talked about to get stronger first.
How do you know when you're strong enough to add stability?
That's a good question. I've thought quite a bit about standard markers for men and women in the hard enduro, dirt bike, motorcycle, motocross world. I don't necessarily think that they're super important. I don't know. It's hard. If you go online, you'll be able to find, what's a strong dude, what's a strong female. Like there'll be some markers out there. I don't know how relevant that is for us in the sport. Usually the sport defines, like if you look at the pinnacle of the sport, the athletes at the pinnacle of the sport, they usually define what's strong enough, right? And that's hard because I have no idea what anybody at the top of our sport numbers are.
Hey, Tristan Hart, what are you back squatting?
Totally. Yeah, let's hear it. Cody Webb, Tristan.
Send us your numbers.
Ryder. What else? Who else is out there? Colton.
And then you got to get the girls.
Yeah, I'd love to see some gym markers from you. What can you row a 2K at? What can you squat? What can you bench? How many pull-ups can you do?
So if you got a connection out there to their secret numbers.
But, that's kind of how you define that. And so my first impression would potentially be, I have no idea. I know what I would consider strong, but I don't know if that's necessarily as relative to the sport, right? So I think a dude should be able to do 10 strict pull-ups. I think that's a pretty fair body weight, full range of motion, dead hang. I think a dude, and I'll turn this over and Dan can throw out some Like these numbers, I think a dude should be able to, this jumping off of strength and going into conditioning, should be able to row 2K in under 7 minutes, no matter your size.
What's that rowing at?
145. I think that's pretty fair for somebody at a high level of conditioning that wants to do well in sport. What else? And I think you should be able to back squat your body weight for 5 reps. And these are low bar.
These are for men, by the way.
And this would be for dirt bikers. This isn't, if you go in the strength world, these wouldn't even register. But I think those are pretty fair things, and those would be some pretty general. You should be able to hold an elbow plank for 2 minutes in a really good position. What else would be a couple of decent metrics? Anyways, those are just some thoughts. At some point, I might write these down and put them out in a blog or something, but it is hard to come up with these.
It is hard because it's not, like, I can think of all the ways that this carried over to other, the purposes. Like, when we were at Mountain Athlete, there was gym-based numbers based on stuff, but it was all gym-based.
Right, but it seems like it carries over to the outdoor sport. Like, you need to be able to carry
CrossFit, I mean, obviously, there was probably standards there, but it was all related to the movements
But it also dictated by the sport of CrossFit, right? So if you're looking at the top competitors, it's like, I need to be able to snatch 300 pounds, clean jerk 350.
Dirt biking, it's more of like, can you do a zap? Can you do a wheelie? Right. That's where I think that's probably,
And let's face it, there's some phenomenal riders out there who are not fitness specimens. So it's very challenging.
That's why I think it's not very...
Right, that's why I haven't pursued it terribly far. I think it's interesting, and I think somebody should, but I need data.
Yeah.
More data.
Yep. Can you do a zappy?
That's not necessarily the data I'm talking about. I'm talking about, what can you do? How many strict pull-ups? How many body weight back squats? What's your 2K row?
How fast can
Come
you
on,
do a figure eight?
IRC tire guy, hit us up. Tell us your numbers. Where were we? Balance and stability. So it's important to place balance and stability where it is. Don't get carried away with the sexy stuff you see on Instagram. That's a bunch of nonsense. Use the gym, get stronger. Practice. I personally, I honestly think balance and stability should be done mostly in sport. Like, if you want to get better in balance and stability in relation to dirt biking, go static balance in the garage. Go stand on your dirt bike. Like, that's going to do more for you than doing, but for the most part, than introducing some type of unstable surface and doing a dumbbell movement. Right? Get real sport specific with it if that's your end goal. If you just want to mix it up and get some variation in training for some accessory work and it's not your main lifts, I'm all for it. I think it's great. It's interesting. It's fun, right? All those things. We do weird stuff every now and then, but I still believe there's some carryover, and I'm not saying there's no carryover. I just think that's one of those ones that it looks sexy and people are drawn to it, but I think some of it's pointless.
I think if you're listening to this, you should send us how many strict pull-ups you can do with your body weight, what your 2K row is,
and body weight back squat.
And your...
So that would mean we'd need how much you weigh and how many back squats you can do with body weight.
Say, that one's just a little bit harder, but sure. Send us any relevant gym metric. I'm dying to know now, Anyways, that was a total tangent.
But those would be 3 good ones. Strict pull-ups.
If you've made it this far in the podcast, send us a DM on Instagram.
Body weight back squats.
How many pull-ups can you do? Let's just start with that.
Need
if we could get that one's really easy to test.
From standing to parallel and back up.
I think we should scrap that one.
And a 2K row.
Just focus on the pull-ups. The others are bonus. Focus on the pull-ups because everyone can do that. You can either hang from a bar and do 0, or you can hang from a bar and do 1 to many.
All right, send us an email. Hit us up on Instagram.
Here's your homework.
Send us DM. All right.
So Josh and Dane's curiosity gets curbed.
So quick recap. How and when to progress. Progress when you can move the weight, load, tempo, whatever, well, with quality movement, time to make it harder. And on the flip side, if you cannot, right, or if it's too hard and you can't kind of hit the reps or sets of reps that are called out for, possibly regressing the movement or making it a little bit easier, scaling it back until you can and building back up. Number one, as far as our 6 go, range of motion, starting with less, increasing that is a way to progress it, and reversing that for regressing. Exercise selection, starting with easier exercise, working your way toward harder exercise. If whatever's called out for is too hard, trying to find good substitutes that are a little bit easier. Number 3, load and resistance. Add load when you can, take it away if you need to. Number 4, tempo, manipulating the cadence per rep. Right? Again, that's a great one. Reps, very simple. Add more reps, make it more challenging. Take reps away to make it easier. And then the last one, use with caution. Balance and stability. Get it in your sport.
Alright.
I think that's it.
I'm sure there's maybe some ways that we left out, but those were the 6 that came to our brain.
And again, this was hopefully mostly based off progressing and regressing exercises.
Not your training.
A bunch of different variables and probably a whole nother list. Some of these would be applicable, but if we were talking about trying to progress and regress training as a whole.
Training
right?
plans.
So anyways. All right.
All right. Thanks for listening. You made it through another episode with Dan and Josh from Enduro Method. If you enjoyed it, give us a 5-star review.
Well, go do some pull-ups and let us know.
Yeah, that's really it. You can find us on Instagram at Enduro Method. You can find us on the webpage, enduromethod.com. We offer that discount for our Enduro Method, or our podcast listeners. So if you're interested in joining the program, make sure to check that out in the bio.
Yep, now's the time.
Now's the time.
Get started for next year.
All right, cheerio.
All right, bye.